Good morning, good afternoon to all of you who are listening in. Again, my name is Steve Lang. I'm with Microsoft as a developer technology specialist. Today we're going to be walking through Team Foundation Server for developers. Team Foundation Server is a pretty big tool. We're going to talk about that a little bit, but we're going to focus mostly on what that means for you, the developer. So let's get right into it. So here's what we're going to walk through in the next 60 minutes we have together. I'm going to give you a brief overview of what Team Foundation Server is and its major moving parts. Then we'll jump right into more of the fundamentals around the version control system in Team Foundation Server. That's usually one of the big pieces that developers hit the most inside of TFS. But we're going to focus a little more on the team aspect as well in the third and fourth bullet by talking about the integrated experience that Team Foundation Server provides and how it can elevate the project visibility up to managers and managers without adding too much overhead to you, the developer. So that said, let's get a quick run through of what Team Foundation Server actually is. Team Foundation Server is sort of the core nervous system, if you will, of Microsoft's application lifecycle management suite, which consists of Team Foundation Server, Visual Studio, and other extensibility points such as Microsoft Office, Expression, and SharePoint. Together, all these tools are very well integrated to create a very powerful collaboration platform for development teams. We will, of course, be focusing on TFS today, but this is really where it plugs in. It is truly meant to be the quote-unquote foundation of your development process. So Team Foundation Server, from a nuts and bolts perspective, it's a three-tier ASP.NET web service application. So effectively means it's a bunch of web services sitting on an IIS machine with a SQL Server backend. So everything that Team Foundation Server manages for you and your teams goes straight into SQL Server. So it's very scalable, very maintainable, and also very relatable, which you'll see as we go through our 60 minutes. The main areas, again, we're going to be focusing on today are around the version control and a little bit of the work item tracking and build system. But the first bullet, I think, or first element, I think, is really important as well, in that Team Foundation Server is very process focused, in that it allows you to literally bake in your development methodology, whether or not it be a strict adherence to, say, RUP methodology, Agile, Scrum, Kanban, what have you, or you have a flavor of that that you're using in your organization. The point is that Team Foundation Server allows you to take that process, that how you get your work done, and really bake it into the system to let TFS provide some guidance and automation for you. So again, we're going to be focusing on the version control system primarily for this time together, but just keep in mind that a lot of this revolves around whatever process you decide to use inside of Team Foundation Server. So let's go through the version control fundamentals of Team Foundation Server first. You're going to have to let me clear air for a couple of things real quickly. First of all, Team Foundation Server came out in late 2005, early 2006. When it did, there were a few misconceptions about what it was for, who it targeted, and what it could support. Even with it's now in its third major release of TFS 2010, which came out last fall, or last spring, excuse me, the conception is that there's still some restrictions about how you can use it. So these are the main misconceptions that I hear most of the time, such as Team Foundation Server is really just Visual Source Safe version next under the covers, when in fact that's not the case at all. The second one is, of course, that TFS is for .NET development only. And while, of course, we'd like you to do that, it is not for .NET development only, and you'll see that. And lastly, that you have to use Visual Studio. There are a multitude of clients that you can use to work with Team Foundation Server, several of which have nothing to do with Visual Studio. So you'll see that as we go through it. The main bullet I like to tackle is the TFS thought that TFS is for .NET development only. And while yes, there are some perks to having that tightly integrated experience between Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server when you're doing .NET-based development, it is definitely not a requirement, and it's definitely not a constriction. So basically, I explained it that if you can see the file or save a file on your hard drive, and you can see it in some sort of Explorer window, you can version control it inside of Team Foundation Server. It's any type of file, any size of file, anything like that. As I mentioned, there's lots of version control clients which you can use to talk to Team Foundation Server as a developer. So again, you're not constrained to using Visual Studio. My demos today will be inside Visual Studio, but we also do have standalone clients called Team Explorer, a rich command line interface. We have a Windows Explorer extension as well, so you can work strictly on the file system and still version control your artifacts in and out of Team Foundation Server. And we also have a relatively new arrow in our quiver, if you will, for any other type of development environment that is not Windows-based or .NET-based. It's called Team Explorer Everywhere. So if you're doing Eclipse-based development, or if you have maybe a heterogeneous environment where you have some developers that are working in .NET, some are working in Eclipse, some are working on a Linux platform versus Windows platforms, we have a client to support that. So Team Foundation Server truly does not care what you put into it, what types of clients talk to it. Is very extensible from that perspective. All right, so here are the sort of 6 main areas we're going to walk through as far as talking about Team Foundation Server version control. You're going to have to just take my word for it that as any good version control would do, it does check in a file, it does check out a file. You can label and do some basic things like that. So I'm going to focus on some of the more, I think, compelling capabilities of the version control system and how it can really help you, the developer. First of all, one of the main things, or the main foundations or cornerstones of the version control system in TFS is the notion of a change set. And it's really a container of information that's related to any sort of single check-in process. So when you are checking in a single file, 10 files, 1,000 files into Team Foundation Server, if you're doing it as part of one operation, it is going into Team Foundation Server as a single change set or a single unit of change. So it's very easy to recognize atomic units of change, related objects that are getting checked in at the same time. So you don't need to sort and group and search by timestamps and whatnot to try to figure out what this person all checked in at one time. It all goes in a single change set. It's also uniquely identifiable at the server level. So regardless of how many projects you have in Team Foundation Server, if someone asks you to look at, say, change set number 1, 2, 3, you can do a quick search for change set 1, 2, 3, and you'll look exactly at what they want you to take a peek at. Doesn't matter what project you're in. So just remember that every time you check in something, you're creating a new change set in Team Foundation Server. And you'll kind of see how the power of that idea really kind of resonates well with helping you mitigate a lot of your normal overhead work that you do during your day. Check-in policies, which you'll also see in a minute when we go into the demo, is a great way of helping to enforce a little bit of process and helps to gently encourage you, the developer, to do the minimal amount of legwork possible to not only check in your code, but to also reflect why you're checking in that code. Are you checking in to fix a bug? Are you checking in to complete a task? And check-in policies are also used to help verify that codes perhaps meet certain standards. So think of these as a gentle requirement for having to check in something. You can create your own. You can, of course, override them, as I'll show you as well. But there are several check-in policies that come out of the box with Team Foundation Server, some which are as simple as requiring you to create a relationship between the code you're checking in and a bug that you're fixing or a requirement you're implementing. Or it could be something as simple as running a battery of unit tests, and they all have to pass before you check in. So there's a whole set of check-in policies, and you'll see that in a couple minutes. A workspace is effectively a mapping between a location in the version control system and a location on your file system. So really all you're doing is saying, this is my working folder. This is where I'm checking files in and out. The most important thing about this slide, or about the concept of workspaces, is that a workspace is unique to a user and to a machine. So that if you have multiple users in your system, which ideally you do if you're working with the team, each person can have the flexibility to tell TFS, here's where I want to be checking in out my code from. So if I like to work off of my documents folder, someone else wants to work off their D drive somewhere, that's not a problem. As long as TFS knows where you want to go, it doesn't matter. Shelving, I think, is one of the most undervalued capabilities in Team Foundation Server. And here's why. Shelving is effectively a way of setting aside or almost checking in changes without actually checking in those changes. It's a way of taking whatever pending changes you might have or edited files you might have on your local file system and putting them on an electronic shelf in Team Foundation Server. It's a great way to do things such as task switching, doing peer reviews, and backing up your local work in progress. As far as task switching goes, this is the most common scenario people will leverage for shelving. If I'm merely working away on version next of my application, I've got a bunch of files checked out, so I've got a whole list of pending changes to put back into TFS eventually, and my boss breaks down my door and says, I don't care what you're doing, drop your work and pull down this other code and fix this problem. We've got a 5-alarm fire out in production. Well, now I have a problem. What do I do with all this code that I currently have checked out? I don't want to undo my changes and lose all the work I've done. I don't want to check in my changes because it'll probably break the build. And so what do? Is I normally take, I've seen people will, zip up their code and set it somewhere else on their file system, or they'll, rename the folder to, previous work and create a new folder with the same name, because you are going to have some conflicting code you're working on. And so you really find yourself creating sort of an ad hoc desktop-based version control system on your own, and that's a lot of work. That's a lot of overhead. Shelving mitigates that by allowing me to take all my work in progress that I had and put it on that electronic shelf in TFS, clean it out of my local workspace, and allow me to then work on whatever my boss has been asking me to work on. When I'm done, I simply go back out to Team Foundation Server and bring my changes back down, and it restores my workspace to how it was at that moment in time. Very useful, very capable feature in shelving. I think it's a capability that I have a lot of customers who see it as sort of a nifty, nice-to-have capability, but once they start using it, it very quickly becomes an integral part of their development process. You can also use shelving to share code, to do peer reviews, because you're allowed to share your shelves with other people. So if I have someone that is an expert in doing security reviews, instead of me emailing them a bunch of my stuff or checking in and hopefully they check out the right content from version control, I can shelve my code I want them to review and give that person permission to bring that down. They can then restore basically my workspace to theirs, and they can do whatever sort of annotations they want to do. Again, a very powerful, very capable, I think very undervalued feature inside of Team Foundation Server. Any version control system needs the capability to do any sort of differencing on files to not only identify different lines of code, but also conflicts, so changes to the same line of code. Team Foundation Server obviously has that. You have the ability to compare not only different versions of the same file, you can compare different files in different locations, and you can compare entire folder structures at the same time. You can also do comparisons across branches. So if you're doing parallel development and you want to merge something, say from a bug fix branch to a main branch, or from your gold branch to a QA branch, you have a very readily available tool to allow you to see what those changes are before you initiate the branch or initiate that merge operation. You also have the ability to plug in your own differencing and merging tools in the Team Foundation Server. So we come with some stock ones out of the box, but if you have a custom tool you like to use, or if you like to use things like a Raxus merge or Beyond Compare or Goofy Diff, whatever you want, you have the ability to plug that in Team Foundation Server to say, when I want to difference this type of file, launch this differencing tool, or launch this merge tool. When I want to do this type of file, launch this tool as well. It gives you a lot of flexibility there. So now you have the ability to say diff binary files or diff image files if you have an image diffing tool, without confusing the version control system with that. And lastly, annotation is a great way of looking or inspecting a file content historically without looking at the previous revisions itself. For instance, if you're looking at a line of code in a file, if you've ever been doing a quick peer review or code review of a file, and you come across a method or a function that kind of makes you scratch your head and say, I wonder why that's in there. I'd like to talk to the person who wrote that line of code. Well, how do you identify who wrote that one line of code? You can see who last checked in the file, but you can't see who actually wrote that line of code. That's what Annotate is for. It allows you to look at the historical changes within the file itself to identify who the last person was to touch a certain block of code, and you'll see an example of that. So branching, merging is sort of a necessary evil, I think, for a lot of my customers. They don't want to branch any more than necessary because it, of course, does add some complexity. TFS tries to mitigate that complexity as much as possible. We have done a lot of work in the 2010 release of Team Foundation Server to allow you to get some better visualization of your branching relationships and branch hierarchies, to better track where changes have been propagated across branches. And so you'll see an example of that as well. It's the notion of branching merging is simply that you branch for isolation, so you can bring in into a new branch, what the latest version of your code is, a labeled version of the code based upon a date and time, something like that, and allow you to do some work in isolation. And when you're done, do the merge operation, push that back. And I will show you an example of that too. So that said, let's flip over here. Okay, so what you're hopefully seeing is you're seeing my little demo image here, and I'm currently connected to Team Foundation Server from Visual Studio. If you haven't seen Visual Studio 2010, this is what it looks like. Nice new color scheme. It's all WPF based, so it's very flexible. So what I'm connected to right here is this panel called Team Explorer. This is my main conduit inside Visual Studio to Team Foundation Server. So Team Foundation Server has the notion of team projects, and I have a team project called Awesome Apps. Inside my Awesome Apps project, I've got nodes here to access my work items, which are my bugs, tasks, requirements, whatever I want to call them. I have a documents folder, which is effectively, think of it as a document library inside SharePoint, because this does integrate directly with SharePoint sites as well. And I've got a reports folder for looking at any different types of SQL reporting services reports, which are sitting on top of the SQL database on TFS. And I've got a builds folder as well for looking at any sort of defined build processes that I may have set up. So a continuous integration build, a nightly build, smokescreen build, etc. And then I've also got a team members node where I can actually look at other people who are on my team. And if I have a messaging client installed, I can also initiate quick ad hoc meetings with them. I can send them some messages. I can look at their calendar. But here I can also see what they've currently been checking in and checking out, look at their current shelves. Great way of collaborating with the rest of your team. But what we want to focus on is the source control. So let me hide this a little bit, give myself as much real estate as possible. So the Source Control Explorer is for navigating around your source control tree. So in this example, in my Awesome Apps project, I have a branch called Greetings. I have one called Greetings for Development, and I've got one for QA. So if I look at Greetings Dev, I can basically navigate through, just like I'm navigating through folders in my file system, and look at my different files that I have. I can right-click on any file or any folder. I can check in stuff, check out stuff, compare, look at history, etc. So if I look at, say, this file or look at the README file, you see I've got options for viewing my history, annotating, searching, etc. Now, to do your version control operations, we wanted to make it as simple as possible, so so you don't have to switch between panels as much as you might think. So we've, just as you have ever worked with any other version control system that is somewhat integrated with Visual Studio, we're also very tightly integrated with Solution Explorer. So you see you have icons for when something is locked, if it's checked out by somebody else, you can put your cursor over the icon, and it'll tell you who has this file checked out and locked, and it'll give you other status information as well. So again, right-clicking on a file, the option to do my get latest, check in, check out, etc. So let's walk through something real quickly. Let's just say that I've been given a little task to make a change here. So if I look at this piece of code, you'll see that it's just the world's most simple Hello World type app. All it's doing is just returning greetings based upon a list of greeting objects. So let's say I've been tasked with adding a new element in here, a new functionality into this piece of code. I'm just going to do it from a little snippet to save myself a little bit of time. And all it does is just going to go ahead and grab a greeting from the greeting list and return it, greeting whoever the name was that was passed in. Very simple and straightforward. You'll notice is I've also configured Team Foundation Server to automatically check out the file for me whenever I start editing the file. It's just a nice time saver there, so I don't have to worry about right-clicking and checking out and then opening the file or anything like that. It's just, again, trying to just get the version control system out of your way as much as possible. So now I've got that as well, and say I want to go ahead and make a change to the program file, to the console app that's actually calling it. If I want to go ahead and comment this for a second. And I'm just making, again, just making a little change here. So all I'm doing now is when I run in this project, all it's going to do is just run it and take my name and give me a greeting back. Very simple, very straightforward. But now I've got two files checked out. So if I did not want to go ahead and make this change yet, but I have made it. It's already checked out the file. It's as simple as just saying undo my pending change, and it'll actually go ahead and just let me know that I'm about to discard my changes, and I'll roll that change back out, and you can see now the file is back to the latest version that's in version control. However, I also have this file this is actually what I was tasked to add, was another little method here. So now I actually want to check this file in. Now you can check in the file several different ways. I can do it from Solution Explorer by right-clicking and choosing Check-in. I can also do it from the Source Control Explorer. I can also see here that the file's been checked out, so I can right-click and check in or use the toolbar button. And I can also use a pending changes window, which is basically shows me a running list of all these changes that I've been making locally that I may eventually want to commit back to the server. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to right-click and say check in. And this is our check-in dialog. So I see that it scopes the check-in process just to the file that I'd chosen to check in. And says here's what I'm going to change. If I wanted to compare it to a previous version, I can do that to see what's changed. So we just opens up a simple diff tool and tells me here's what wasn't there before, here's what I'm proposing to add into this file. And more importantly, you'll see that there's an area for me to put comments. I can actually have other people provide notes as well. So if I know that this code was reviewed by Bob Smith, I can put in Bob Smith actually reviewed this code, and that just provides additional annotations for this. Really what I'm doing with this dialog is I'm setting up that change set that's going to be created when I do the check-in. And so there's also a tab here to allow me to create relationships to work item elements. Work item, again, being a task, a bug, a requirement, whatever sort of item or record that's dictating my work. So I can actually create a relationship at check-in time to save myself more time. This is a great way of saving me some additional steps along the way. Oops, didn't mean to close that. So let's say I'm ready to go and check in this file, and I hit check-in. Then you'll see I get a pop-up message saying, you know what, your check-in cannot proceed because your requirements have not been satisfied. This is a check-in policy at play. So you know, the dev team has implemented a check-in policy which basically says, if you look at the policy warnings dialog, says you must associate this check-in with one or more work items. So they're dictating, this policy is dictating that we want you to provide a very tangible reason as to why you're making a change. So you're not just randomly checking a file just because you feel like it. So as you saw, there's something that can be overridden. So you can always you know, override that policy if it absolutely positively just has to get checked in. You're welcome to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and adhere to the policy and say I need query relationship to the work. It says here's that one that I want. It says add functionality to return the greeting message, give it a name. So I'm going to check that off. You'll see I also have an option in this check-in action dialog that says, do I want to resolve this or associate this? If I set this to resolve, what I'm saying is I am now done with this task when I check in this code or check in this change set. So Team Foundation Server, please go ahead and move this task along into the resolve state of the workflow. If I know that I'm not done with it yet, but I still want to create that relationship, I can simply set the check-in action to associate. This is very much a time saver when you are setting it to resolve, because you don't then have to go ahead and finish checking in the file, go over to your task management system, find the task, open it up, move the status, and then close it again. This will basically do all that for you, and any workflows and notifications and stuff that kick off as a result take place. So I'm going to go ahead and just say associate just so I have it still in the proper list here. And now I've checked in that file. So let's edit another file here, simple README file. I'm going to go ahead and say just another one, my random text. Compelling, I know. And so again, I checked up the file for me silently. Now here, maybe I don't want to check it in this time. Now, if I want to, I can shelve it instead. So I can set aside this change. Also, I want to share it with somebody else. So when I choose shelve my pending changes, I get the option to go ahead and create a new shelf. And the shelf is, I can call it anything like, I'll just call it webinar shelf. And I can add any comments. I can create some tentative relationships to items. And I can tell it, do I want to keep everything checked out that I already had checked out as a result of me creating this shelf, or do I want to really set it aside and include in my workspace? So if I uncheck that box, it'll actually clean up my local workspace as well. So you see now, if I open up this file, I have the original server version of it. I don't have that local change that I just made. When I'm ready to get my code back from the shelf, I can simply go to this menu where it says unshelf pending changes, and I can get a list of all the shelves based upon the owner. There's my webinar shelf. I can look at the details for that and see there's that README text file there. And when I'm ready, hit unshelf. Now it's checked out that file for me. If I go back into it, there's my change that I made before. So really all I was doing, I was just offloading these sort of temporary files, these work in progress files, off to the Team Foundation server as well, but not kicking it into the version control system itself. So let's say I'm ready to go ahead and check in this guy. Let's say again I get a policy warning. Here I'm going to override it. I'll say this is just text. So I check that in. Now, if someone wanted to see who wrote this line of code, as I mentioned before, that's where something like annotation comes into play. So I can right-click on my file and say annotate. And what it will do is rather than me having to say go through the history of the file, which I can do here, and try to figure out who last made that line of change, who last changed that line, this is what you have to do historically. You have to take the current is -1, right-click and compare and look and see if that line changed. If that didn't do it, then you historically have to do this and do the next one back and compare, and keep doing that recursively until you find that line that's changed. So annotation kind of takes that busy work on for me and opens up the current file, but in the margin on the left, if you can see that, and it's all been changed by my user, so it's not as compelling as you'd like it to see, but it will tell you, here's the last person that modified this line of code or this line in the file, when they did it, and by the way, here's the change set ID for that detail. So I can actually click on this and say and open up the details and say there's that change that I just checked in a second ago. And see I actually overrode that policy, and here was my reasons for doing so. So annotation is a great way of just helping to identify intra-file historical changes, if you will. Okay, that said, let's do a quick demo of branching and merging, and then we'll get back to some other fun stuff here. So I'm back into the Source Control Explorer. You'll see I have different nodes here. Again, one for the main line, one for dev, and then one for QA as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make a change in dev, and then I'm going to go ahead and merge that up to main. Now, actually, I've gone ahead and made that change, so I should have some things to merge. What I'd like to show you first is the ability to understand the relationship between these different branches. In this sort of file folder structure you see here, this is completely arbitrary. So you can organize your source control structure, your branching structure, in any physical manner you want. Team Foundation Server will still understands and manages the logical parent-child, grandchild, sibling hierarchy of your different branches. So what I'm going to do is I actually want to take a quick look at the hierarchy here to understand how everything looks. So since I focus this on dev, I can see that dev is a direct descendant of the main greetings item. If I want to see everything else, let's say show full hierarchy, and now I can see that where I'm in now is dev, but there's also a sibling called QA. So everything is hinging off of this main greeting area here. So let's say that I'm ready to do my merge. I can actually simply drag and drop this up here, and it'll kick off the merge process saying, okay, yep, I see you want to merge from dev to greetings. Now what do you want to merge? Do you want to merge everything that I can find that's different, or do you want to merge a specific change? I'm going to say I want to merge everything. I want to merge based on everything that's latest. I'll hit finish. And what I've done is I've given it some options to say, if you just find differences in files, meaning where there's not a conflict on the same line of code, just go ahead and auto merge it for me. If you find a conflict where the same line of code has been changed in both branches, then please let me know and let me manually resolve that. So now that I've completed my merge, but it's not totally complete. If I look at here, I'll see this is what basically the target branch I was going to. I'll see there's a bunch of changes here that says they're currently pending as merges. What this did is the merge process takes your proposed changes and puts them in your workspace or your working folder for the target location. This is done very specifically so that you can now run additional tests against these to make sure the merge went properly or you did the merge properly. So you can then check that in as one merge change. So I like what I see here. I can go ahead and just check in everything here. I'll say finished my merge. Check in. I can open my policy only because I'm just doing it for a demo. And now I've completed that merge. So now if I look at the history of one of these files, so here's that check-in comment where I said then I did the merge. And where did it come from? Well, it came from this location as well. So it's very easy for me as a developer to understand where files have come from. So if all of a sudden I inherit a change that I don't understand, I can very quickly understand why it got there and where it came from. If I want to further track where this has been pushed, for instance, now I know I've pushed this back up to the main branch, but maybe I want to make sure it's been propagated properly elsewhere. What I can do is I can actually click on this button which says Track Change Set. And what it will do is give me an option to say what branches do I want to make sure it's been propagated to. So I'll choose my 3 branches. And here what I can see is I can see in green that my changes have been, these different change sets which I checked into dev, were all merged up into greetings as change set 87. But they don't, that change that is encapsulated in change set 87 doesn't exist in QA. I can also track this based upon a timeline, so I can see better on this date, all these changes were then merged into 87, and again, I can see that nothing exists in QA. So if I wanted to propagate this change to QA, I can actually just drag this down here and just kind of plow through this change. And you see right here, it actually chose me to pick an individual change set, because I actually am pushing just the change set itself. So I'll let that finish. And now what I can see, if I go down to QA, I've got all these changes here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and check in those. New merge. And now I've got that in there too. So again, if I look at, say, the history of a file, to kind of track that change. Whoops, not annotate. Wrong button. Now I can see that the change has been applied and was introduced as change set 88. I can see the timeline for when I did that. So again, all these different visualization tools just really helping me, the developer, better understand where my code is going, where it needs to be, and how it got there. Okay, so let's close all that and flip back over here. Before I move on, are there any questions yet?
There aren't any questions thus far, Steve.
Okay, great. So the other area I want to talk about, yes, the version control system is great. Where I think the rubber really hits the road with Team Foundation Server is its ability to integrate with other elements of the application lifecycle. Since Team Foundation Server really is that core element of managing your collaboration and your application development process, I think having these integration points is crucial to enabling great teams to do great things. So there, as I mentioned before, there are other moving parts to TFS, such as the process guidance, process templates, the work item tracking system, reporting system, as well as the build management system. You can see the version control system really ties in well with all of those by allowing you to create different builds directly from version control, provide reports back from the build system showing exactly what changes went into what builds. The reporting system automatically gathers metrics from the code that's going into the system, so it can understand code velocity and code churn elements, and you can report upon that. And also, what I think is the most important is the integration of a work item tracking system. It allows you to create some traceability and visibility into how your project is going without weighing you, the developer, down very much. It's still making all your managers very happy with being able to report on things. Another key element of integration, what I like, is a new capability in 2010 called the gated check-in. A gated check-in really helps reduce the likelihood of a broken build when you check in something in the version control system. If you've ever been working on a bunch of code, got a bunch of stuff checked out, and you're getting ready to check in and saying, I wonder if this is going to break the build when I hit commit. Continuous integration does a great job of obviously running a build every time a change occurs in the version control system to let you know pretty quickly if you broke something. But if you do, by doing that, you can cause blockages among your team. So if you need to break something, it can cause some issues. Gated check-in allows you to really kind of get past this old stigma of edit, check-in, then test, and then try to fix the problem afterwards, which does block your team from doing additional check-ins, or should block your team from doing additional check-ins because you don't want to check in on top of something that's already broken. A gated check-in kind of takes that paradigm and turns it on its side and does the build process, or the build validation, if you will, prior to doing your check-in. So by going through this process, when I try to check in that code that I'm pretty sure will work fine because hey, it works on my machine, but hopefully it'll work on the build machine, Team Foundation Server will take that code and build it for you on a build server. And then if all the builds and any tests that go along with it pass, then it'll go ahead and check it in on your behalf. If it does not pass, it will kick it back to you in the form of a shelf and tell you, sorry, it would have broken the build, so we didn't check this in for you. Here's a link to the build log. Here's a link to your change set to your shelf to go get your code back. And then you're allowed to fix that problem before it actually becomes a problem for the rest of your team. It's a very, very powerful capability inside TFS by integrating the build system, the build automation system, with the version control system. So let's take a very quick look at that. What I'm going to do for that is I'm going to go ahead and turn on this gated check-in right here. I'm happy to talk at any other time to anyone else on the phone more about the build system, but since we're focusing on other things today, this gated check-in build does is just it enforces gated check-in, and it's going to just do a quick build on a build machine to make sure that I'm not breaking anything. So let's go ahead and edit greeting. Hopefully that doesn't break anything, right, with a comment. So let me go ahead and check this file back in. Maybe create a relationship to a work item. Now I get a pop-up saying, I'm going to do a gated check-in for you. I went ahead and shelved your changes as gated check-in 2011, 222, etc. And I'm going to go ahead and work on this, and I'll let you know how it goes. I can say I have to go ahead and preserve my pending changes in case something breaks. I'm pretty sure this is going to work, so I undo that box. So now I can continue doing whatever sort of work I want to do, move on to my next task. But I got a little toast pop-up saying, you know what, this gated check-in was triggered, so it's running right now. I can also go and watch how this gated check-in process is working, so by just watching how the build report is getting built out for me. And effectively, when it's done, it'll go ahead and check in on my behalf. Now, if it breaks, I'll get another pop-up saying, sorry, it broke. Here's how you fix it. And I think when I come back to the next demo, that build will be done, and we can kind of see how that plays out. The last major area that I want to talk to you about today is this notion of project visibility. And a lot of developers, when I talk to them about this kind of topic, they cringe a little bit. And for the main reason is that it's hard on them. I mean, it adds a lot of overhead where you should be spending your time as a developer being creative, developing new code, adding new functionality, and truly adding business value to your organization. Now, the managers and the boss's boss, they want to have some insight into how you and your team are doing, so they can tell their stakeholders if you're going to be done on time, what features are going to make it in scope, what have to be pulled out for the next release, etc. But that takes reporting, that takes metrics and numbers, and that's something that can slow a developer down or give them at least an alt tab if you were forcing them to context switch in order to report all information. So really, it comes down to Team Foundation Server trying to mitigate that as much as possible and allow the developer, managers, and et cetera to get the information they need to get the clarity that they need into the project, but still allow you, the developer, to be as creative and productive as possible. So this is what I've seen a lot. If you ever looked at some code, especially older code, you'll see in order for someone to, when they're adding a new piece of functionality into the system, they kind of create this loose coupling, if you will, to a task. So when someone is interrogating code, they can say, oh, this piece of code or this check-in file was to work against task number 1, 2, 3. And similarly, when you go over to say fill out a new task item in the actual details or somewhere in the description, the developer actually has to type in when they're completing their task, saying, I finished this task by adding this function into this class, and I checked it into the version control system, and by the way, it's at version 5 or whatnot. And so you've got a reference to each end from each tool, but there's no tangible relationship between the two. And it takes a lot of work for you actually to type this in. I mean, this seems a very simple example, but extrapolate that over several thousand files. So what we have in 2010, TF Foundation Server, is what you've already seen, in the ability to create that relationship very tangibly, just as part of your normal check-in process in the version control. It can allow you to create that relationship, and then that relationship is saved and it's queryable and is reportable, which is very important for your managers. One of the other things that kind of slows you down in terms of adding overhead is the need to switch between applications. So if you don't have an integrated version control system with your bug tracking system, your task management system, you often have to go to multiple systems to log that work, just so you have to prove that you've done this work, and that's where you find yourself doing a lot of duplicate key entry. Having everything integrated into Team Foundation Server eliminates that. So myself as a developer, I can stay in my comfort zone, which is Visual Studio or whatever IDE I'm using, and I can still get access to all the work that's been assigned to me, all the bugs that have come to the system, and I can access and I can update that information very readily without me having to have multiple applications open or constantly opening and closing different browsers, etc. And this thing that used to bug me the most is when you're working on something, your manager's coming, either in the old days is knocking on your door saying, hey, where are you on task number 123, or where are you on building feature set A? It's been difficult for them, and it's difficult for you. So what we've added in 2010, we've always had a lot of reports from 2005 and 2008 releases, but in 2010 we added additional reporting and dashboards for different business stakeholders, technical stakeholders, just to check in on see how things are doing. So when your project manager needs to go off to a status meeting, they no longer need to ping every single developer and say, hey, give me a quick update on this. How many hours do you have left on this? What's your percent complete on that one? They have all that information readily for them in the form of dashboards in Team Foundation Server, build reports showing here's exactly what changes and what bugs are being fixed in tonight's build or last night's build. And they can also very quickly build Excel reports, which a lot of people are familiar with, how to just look at lists in Excel. We provide pretty much one-click access to be able to create reports inside Microsoft Excel. So they can take this after the meeting, throw it up on the projector, and say, here's where we are. Are there any questions? So let's take a quick look at that. All right, so we're back in the Explorer. I'll go ahead and open up some. Did I hear a question?
Well, we do have 2 questions, but I think you can maybe, unless you want to get to them now. They're not about what you're specifically talking about.
Okay. Well, this is actually the last thing that we're going to kind of walk through. So we'll handle those in just a minute, I guess.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, so by the way, I came back. It says, yep, my check-in or my gated check-in passed, and so I went ahead and checked into my changes for me. All right. So let's go to the work item tracking system. You can access all your work items by way of queries, which define, say I want to look at all my bugs that have been assigned to me in the last 7 days, all sorts of clauses, if you will, to define how you want to access your data. Let's simply look at all of the tasks currently in this project. So I can see that there's a few here. Here are the open tasks. I wanted to take a look at say a certain task here, I can then open it up, and I'll see this dialog. This dialog is completely customizable, by the way. No need to code to make those changes. You see very quickly I can create relationships between items by this implementation tab and by a links tab. From any work item, I can create a new link to a change set, so therefore to a check-in, to a hyperlink if I want to send someone out to a web somewhere, to an attachment or to an external attachment somewhere, to a test case, to a test, to a versioned item, really to any other work item that I so choose. So it's very easy for me to create those types of relationships. Let's see if I have, can't remember if I created one or not for any of these guys. No, I haven't, so that's okay. But this is where a PM could come and look at the information and see who's been doing what and what all's been checked in against a certain item. And then you as the developer, you can look at the other direction by looking at it from the change set details. Now, when your project manager needs to go off to their status meeting, all they have to do is, for instance, take whatever query contains the data they want. For instance, say they want to look at all the tasks currently in the system. Or let's actually just do this a little bit differently. Let's go ahead and edit this query, and I want to look at all the tasks, not just the open ones. So I'm going to quickly edit this query, say, show me everything in this project, this type of a task. So now I've got a lot more on my list. I've got 19 items. I want to take this off to Excel. I can say, you know what, create me a report in Excel about this. And what it'll do is it'll kind of interrogate the data that's coming through that query, and it's going to build out, I choose to create all the reports, it's going to build this nicely formatted workbook for me with pivot tables, pivot charts, everything that I need as a project manager to more accurately dissect what's going on with my development team. It's going to create a little table of contents for me, and we're done. So just very quickly to walk through them, I can see my breakdown, my work items by priority. I can see which ones those are. I can see by their current state, so I can see active, resolved, closed. I can see who they're assigned to, how well am I load balancing my development team. Another one, such as seeing stack rank, etc., and work item count by priority, assigned to, trend. So this is information that's very critical for project managers and people need to report status. But I, as a developer, I'm not really doing too much work for that. I'm just checking in against those work items, saying if they're done, maybe updating a field here and there. But really, all that work is being done for me by Team Foundation Server, and it's creating all the relationships necessary. And the last thing I'll show you here as well is the project portal. The project portal is leveraging SharePoint. This is something that is optional, but it is included with Team Foundation Server. If you so choose, you're welcome to build these projects or have Team Foundation Server build these project portals for you on the fly, and they're used to surface all that reporting data to the SharePoint site by way of web parts. This is very useful for that upper level manager who does not want to install any sort of client, who maybe doesn't want to use Excel, but still at least wants to be able to check in on a project and see how it's doing. So this will give you reports to look at your task burn down, your burn rate. You can look at some basic information around, traffic light information, red light, green light, how are my projects running, etc. So I'm not going to take time to let this fully build out. This is basically where you can go do that. You can take a look at all the information. You can go to our web client from here. You can submit new work items directly into the system. It gives you a lot of information at your fingertips without having to install a client. So again, very useful for that sort of stakeholder that's on the sort of the fringe of the development lifecycle process, but still wants to check in and see how projects are doing. So you can kind of see our burn rate, task burn down, etc. Okay. So let me go and wrap up, and then we'll take any questions, and I think we'll be done pretty close to on time. Just again, to be clear, Team Foundation Server, especially for developers, it is a fully baked version control system. It's not Visual Source safe under the covers or anything like that. It was built from scratch to be a complete enterprise-ready collaboration system, including version control. It is a default version control system used at Microsoft. I'll show you a slide in just a second showing you how much Microsoft has actually scaled out Team Foundation Server. Team Foundation Server, again, tries just to be, especially the version control system, tries to be out of your way when you don't need it, but it gives you a lot of powerful tools when you do want to take advantage of it. Just a quick example of Team Foundation Server usage at Microsoft. This is as of January, so about a month ago. We currently had almost 26,000 active users inside of Team Foundation server. We have over 101 million source code files inside version control. With, I think we crossed 1 billion revisions a couple months ago, over 6,000 team projects, over 8 million work items, and we do over 1.1 million builds per month, all with over 99% availability. And it basically services over 100 million requests each week. So it's providing enormous scale for Microsoft, which is a very large development organization, but is also flexible enough and simplistic enough to be used for much smaller organizations, or even small as a team of one like myself. Okay, that said, let me open the floor up and see if we have any questions. Andy, you think you said there were a couple in the queue?
There's a little bit more than a couple now. Let's see. From Don, I have a couple of web designers, developers who work on an Apple computer with a Mac OS. Can they use it as well?
Yes, they can. So Team Explorer Everywhere is the tool that you want to use. It is a Java-based implementation, if you will, of our Team Explorer interface. So you can install that on any Java-enabled platform, which includes Mac OS X or later. And they can leverage that to talk to Team Foundation server.
Awesome. Is it possible to host the portal at an external enterprise SharePoint?
If I'm interpreting, it depends on how I interpret the term external. If it's external to, say, the development team, but somewhere, if it's more of like an enterprise SharePoint server farm that's been implemented by your organization, yes, you can. It's not required to use the simple SharePoint services that's installed on the server machine that TFS is hosted on. That's not required at all. If you're talking more about going outside your organization and hosting it, say, more on a public portal site, it is possible, but it takes a little more wiring together to do. But that is certainly feasible to do.
And Steve, is that Team Explorer? Is it shipped with TFS?
Team Explorer is shipped with the TFS media, and you can also download it independently from MSDN as your subscriber. Team Explorer can either be installed standalone, so if you're not using Visual Studio, it actually will install, say, the Visual Studio shell, and then just plug Team Explorer into it. But if you already have Visual Studio installed, and you install Team Explorer, it'll bolt it in alongside, like you saw in the demo.
Okay. Is it possible to use TFS 2010 with Visual Studio 2008?
Yes, it is. There are a couple constraints around that, but everything I've shown you today, with the exception of doing a gated check-in, you can do with we'll call it the Visual Studio 2008 client against the TFS 2010. There's just I think there's a compatibility patch you just need to install, but it's readily available.
Okay, this one's a little bit of a long one. How do you get a detailed overview of all pending changes in the workspace? Detailed means that you not only see the files that have been changed, but also the changes inside the file, i.e. the source code changes.
That's a great question, and it's a little bit harder to do. There's not something that's baked into it. It's probably something that you've probably seen, how you can see your pending changes at the file level, file by file level in a workspace. You can see that in your pending changes window. And that'll go across any projects that you're currently working on, so anything that's in your defined workspace. Seeing that, and you can dump that to a report, but seeing then, for instance, a detail of each one of those in terms of the compare and diff, there is a utility out there that's been on Codeplex, which I don't know has been updated to 2010. Codeplex is an open source development site that runs on TFS. So at codeplex.com, but I'm not sure it's been upgraded to 2010 yet, as far as that utility goes. But I'm going to throw up right now my contact information. So whoever asked that question, send me a note to remind me of that, and I'll see if I can find out if there's an upgraded utility for that.
Great. From Chad, when shelved changes are unshelved, are they automatically merged with the latest code in your workspace?
They're not automatically merged. You can do that from, and it's a little silly to do this right now, but you can do that as part of if you do an unshelve from a command line option, you can do an unshelve and merge, and that will take care of that for you. Straight from the IDE or from the GUI client, it will not merge operation for you. It'll tell you that, hey, you have a conflicting change, resolve that change, and then do the unshelve.
Let's see, from Brett. On the gated check-in, what was the reconcile button?
Great question. So that's about as close to sort of the unshelve and merge as you'll get. So when I did my check-in, it told me I'm going to do a gated check-in for you. I had the option to preserve my pending changes locally. If I had done that, therefore it would have kept my files I wanted to commit checked out for me in my workspace. When the gated check-in completed, it would have that button is there to help me then reconcile any other changes that may have gone to the system. So if I made further edits to that file locally, it would ask me how I want to resolve that, or if it broke, how I want to resolve that. So the reconcile again kind of helps me catch up to what's the latest in the repository.
About shelving. If I've shelved something, can one of my co-developers shelve the same item, or is it exclusively locked to me? And if it's possible to dual shelve, what happens with changes on both sides?
Great question. Yes, you can shelve the same file multiple times. Even the same developer can shelve the same file multiple times. When it comes time to reconcile that, it's the reconciliation takes place is really all about the what's on your local workspace. Because again, since shelving isn't actually a check-in operation, that's why you can shelve multiple instances of the same file. When it comes time to basically, it's sort of a first in wins. So whoever checks in the whatever instance of that file they want goes in the new one, and now those other shelves are still out there, but they're now based upon a slightly out-of-date version of that file. So you would need to merge that on check-in. So if I checked in that file first, someone else had the older copy of the file on the shelf. If they unshelve that file and make some changes to it and then try to check it in, they'll get a prompt to go ahead and merge because now their changes are not based upon the latest version on the server. Hope that made sense. If it didn't, please, whoever asked that question, feel free to send me a note.
Okay. From Tobias, is it possible for external customers to get into the bug tracking system, and if yes, how?
Yes, there is a way to do it. We have a web-based client, which is probably the most common way for instance, you have an end user or an outside stakeholder that needs access to the system. We have a web-based client, which not only gives you access, there's two actually flavors of that client. One which is a pretty robust one, and one which is a work items only client. So if you or work items only web-based browser client. So if you give people access to that URL, then they can access just work items, and they do not actually require a client license for that. If you read the very long-winded licensing white paper for Visual Studio, one of the open areas in the Team Foundation Server licensing is that if you are a user that is talking to Team Foundation Server solely for the purpose of what I call like the fire and forget user, where you're just reporting issues and checking in on issues that you've reported, you do not require a client access license for Team Foundation Server. And that's what that work item only web client is designed for.
Great. Let's see. Is there an easy way to group a set of changes so that we can roll back when we need to implement them? Also, can I walk into different roads of changes, see the effect, and decide which I need to implement and roll back the other change sets?
That's might be a little bit too long for me to reply on over the phone. I can take a quick stab at a couple of different things with that. So rollback, if you've used something like the VSS in the past, is actually not a feature of Team Foundation Servers. It was in a design decision made to say that if you check in something into the version control system, it is truly an auditable part of the version control system, so you can't roll it back out. There is a rollback utility which you can use, but really what it does is it takes the previous version and shoves it back on top. So that change you want to remove is still just now buried in the version control history. As far as viewing which change sets perhaps you want to apply, and I'm probably interpreting that a little bit off, you have the ability to do what's called a cherry pick merge when you want to see what changes you want to apply. So you can actually, a cherry pick merge allows you to apply individual change sets and omitting changes that may have been made to the same affected files in additional change sets. So if you modified line 2 in one change set, and then later you modified line 3 of the same file in an additional change set, you can choose to which change that you want to do. It'll omit changes made from any other changes, any other check-ins in that process. So it's probably a little easier to talk about further or demo at some point. But so whoever asked that question, send me a note as well, and I'll be happy to elaborate further.
Awesome. His name is Man, and I sent him your email just so
Great.
If he wants to drop you a note, he can.
Okay.
Let's see. Can I automate building reports for management on a specific schedule?
Can I build a report for management on a specific schedule? Yes, you can. So all the main reports that you see in Team Foundation Server are all built out of are built on top of SQL reporting services, and those can be kicked off manually. And so if you kick those off from the, say, schedule them to be executed, you can then turn around and have those automatically emailed to somebody or turn into a PDF and then emailed as well. I find that most of my customers find it just as easy to automatically every morning send an email to managers, et cetera, with simply a link saying, here's a reminder, click on this link to check out last night's report or last night's build report, because the reports are going to be automatically generated for you on the fly anyways. So it's rather than going through the process of from either programmatically generating the report and then emailing it, just easiest to just go ahead and schedule and just send the link to the report, because the reports and reporting services are all web-based.
Okay, we have 2 questions left. You've mentioned SharePoint several times. Am I required to install SharePoint to use the full functionality of TFS, or are SharePoint services included with my TFS media and it's not required for me to acquire SharePoint software?
It is not required for you to acquire, i.e. purchase SharePoint software. It works. Team Foundation Server works with all different flavors of SharePoint. 2010, 2007, SharePoint Services, SharePoint Server, anything like that. And it is also not required in order to use Team Foundation Server. It is considered an optional thing. So when you install 2010, you can simply tell it, I don't want to use SharePoint right now. You can always configure it to do so later. Really, the only functionality you lose by electing not to use SharePoint is that integration with the portal site. So if you have managers or whatnot who don't want to install a client to talk to Team Foundation Server, but they still want to have access to generate reports and whatnot, they won't be able to go to the SharePoint site to do that. But it's definitely not required.
All right, and from Booker, how do we initiate the test manager in TFS?
You initiate the test manager in TFS. I'm assuming we're talking about Microsoft Test Manager, which is included in Test Professional. How do you initiate that inside TFS? I'm not quite sure I understand the term of how I mean by initiate that, but the Microsoft Test Manager is a standalone tool, so it would be used by itself, but it also uses Team Foundation Server under the covers to store test plans and test cases, as well as individual test steps and results, and those can be associated with just like any other work item and type into the system. As far as initiated, I'm not sure if you mean launch or whatnot. There are commands you can build into Visual Studio to automatically launch that if you so choose. That's another one I think maybe I'm interpreting incorrectly, just not having the context. So I think those Booker those you send me an email, and I'm happy to discuss it further.
Okay. We did get one more question pop up here. Is it easy to migrate from Visual Source Safe to TFS 2010?
The answer is yes. We include a Visual Source Safe conversion utility with Team Foundation Server. Devil being the details, of course, but it is a pretty straightforward utility. Really, all you're doing is you're going to set up mappings between your users in Visual Source Safe, because those are application-specific users, to your users in Team Foundation Server, because Team Foundation Server uses Active Directory. So you just want to say, here's the author from here to here, and that's pretty much it. And you tell it sort of where you want to take your Visual Source Safe project and where you want to shove it into Team Foundation Server. But it will bring across history, it'll bring across labels, and all the pertinent metadata about each revision of files. So yes, you can definitely convert from VSS to TFS.
Great. Let's see. He says, "Great, time to move."
Yep, it's been a decade. Time to move.
All right. Well, that is all of the questions, Steve.
Okay.
And I just want to I kind of talk about what's coming up, and you have another webinar with us this week. on Visual Studio 2010 testing, correct? This Thursday?
Yeah, this Thursday.
Okay. What is that? What is that one covering?
That's going to be talking about quality first tooling inside Visual Studio 2010 for the developers. So looking beyond just load testing and things like that, which are done after your code is written, but tools that are built inside Visual Studio 2010 to help you write the best quality code before you actually share it with other people.
Awesome. So that, everyone, that webinar is this Thursday at noon Pacific Standard Time, again, with Steve presenting. And also tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, we have the Ask the DevExpress reporting team hosted by reporting evangelist Seth Juarez. Thursday is actually a triple webinar day with Steve closing us out, but we start at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time with building document-based systems with Allende Rahian. In this webcast, we'll explore building document-based systems on top of the Raven DB document database for .NET. We'll explore the different modeling requirements, the trade-offs, and the benefits of using a document-based approach for modeling our systems. And at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, using DevExpress controls to build a ribbon UI and dockable panels in Silverlight with Silverlight evangelist Emil Misropian. And of course, Steve is back Thursday at noon. And finally, Friday, ASP.NET MVC3, using DevExpress extensions with ASP.NET evangelist Mukul Harry. So that's our lineup for this week. To register for all of our webinars that we have scheduled through March, you can register online at devexpress.com/webinars. And again, if you missed anything from this webinar or you want to review it later, we do post them on our DevExpress channel at tv.devexpress.com. Again, thank you so much, Steve. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for choosing DevExpress.
Thank you, everybody.